are you going over and say, hey, I'm willing to do this, or how can I help you over here? I want to know more about what this department. I don't want to do that.
Right.
Are you going out to lunch with your superiors, right? Are
Right.
you going to dinner? Are you going to their barbecue? I don't want, when I get home, when I leave there, I don't want to spend no time with nobody, right? I just want to come in, but I still should be recognized. And I'm like, it ain't gonna happen. All right.
Absolutely.
We'll discuss race and how it plays a factor, and how we didn't even talk about this topic because we were afraid.
A Black Executive Perspective.
Welcome to a Black Executive Perspective podcast, a safe space where we discuss all matters related to race, especially race in corporate America. I'm your host, Tony Tidbit.
And I'm your co-host, Chris P. Reed.
And Chris P. Reed, we are live again at the University of New Haven, 88.7 WNHU, 88.7 on the Richter Dial. I want to thank the University of New Haven for allowing the Black Executive Perspective podcast to come and talk about this topic. Go Chargers.
I also want to thank our partners at Code M Magazine, whose mission is saving the Black family by first saving the Black man. That is Code M Magazine, 2 M's, codemmagazine.com. Please check them out. There's some deep stuff on there.
Yeah, definitely check them out. So, Chris, we're going to pick up where we left off last time, my brother, right? We're going to still talk about the challenging journey up the corporate ladder, right? We're going to start off where we left, talking about imposter syndrome and its impacts on professionals in corporate America. We're also going to discuss today corporate hierarchies, workplace politics, and the importance of leveraging allies and building networks. So we got a lot of stuff to jump into, my brother.
No doubt, no doubt. We up for the task.
Are you up for the task? I know
I
I'm
am.
up for the task.
That's it. Let's see how it goes.
All right, buddy. You ready to talk about it?
I am, sir.
All right, let's talk about it. So like I said earlier, in our last episode, we talked about imposter syndrome, how it affects everyday professionals, all right, in every industry throughout all walks of life. And we talked about how high achievers are a group of individuals that deal with imposter syndrome. But we also spoke about how other groups, racial groups, sexuality, women also deal with imposter syndrome. And we had Professor Lee from Northeastern University explain exactly what is imposter syndrome and how it affects people. Today, we want to really dive right back into Professor Lee and talk about the antidote, in terms of what you can do with how you can deal with imposter syndrome. But before we go there, Chris, give us, again, from our last episode, give us your feedback on imposter syndrome, because you spoke a little bit about some of the things that you went through that, definitely contribute to you having imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. So one of the big takeaways from our last call and the information that we disseminated was the fact that high achieving people can have those insecurities and are more susceptible to those insecurities because you're used to operating at a certain wavelength. And this is, like you said, cascades beyond race and gender and identity and all these other things, because high achieving people exist in all of those areas, right? And so I think that what happens is you get accustomed and used to a certain level of productivity, a level of affinity, a level of recognition. And when you hit those stumbling blocks, right, then you don't recognize them as stepping stones or opportunities. You end up getting in your own head. And we talked about that, where, you know what, this is momentary, this is temporary, this is a phase, but you feel like it's the worst situation ever because you didn't account for this or contemplate this as part of your journey, part of your trajectory. You didn't realize there was going to be turbulence. See, it's better when the pilot announces that early on, as opposed to him forgetting that line and then you get in the air and the plane gets shaky. I think these are great things for us to earn and understand as professionals, is that there will be turbulence in different forms or fashions. But for me, it was a situation where I was young. I had as far as I was concerned at that point in my life, I had outkicked my coverage. You know what I mean? I was working in the AC and all this, that, and I felt attacked. I felt like somebody was trying to take that comfort or that accomplishment away from me But the reality of it was that person's insecurities that they were cascading. But it made me feel like, wait a second, I've been exposed. I should have never gotten to this point. I missed something in my calculation. So I had to go back and check my work to see what was going on. And as you said, if you couple the receipts, you can combat this to a degree. But sometimes those psychological things that we encounter, that's why they're called crazy. You can't rationalize or work your way out of them.
Right. They become the elephant in the room, the big thing that seems like insurmountable, right?
Yep.
Here's the thing though, imposter syndrome, obviously we can deal with that when we're young, when we're, starting out, but there's people in all different type of ages that deal with imposter syndrome. You get a promotion to a new level. You haven't, you think you can do it, but you haven't done it yet, right? And then you start making the people around on that level bigger and more accomplished, and that, oh, look at where they went to school. Look how smart Joe is or Sandy. And all of a sudden, I don't think I rate. So it doesn't automatically have to be that you're some young individual. You moving on to a new role, or you just got hired at a job, and you got hired at a level you didn't think that you could even be at. Okay. And now you're there. They saw something in you. So you start getting, insecure, right? So let's talk to let's have Dr. Lee talk about what you can do when you're dealing with imposter syndrome.
So it's very important when we think about imposter syndrome that we recognize that some of us face particular risks. And we also see, again, within this hyper-competitive market, many of us feeling insecure. And what we have to really recognize is that we're all at a point in our development. We know what we know. We don't know what we don't know. But this is what connects us in our shared humanity. So even if at first you show up and you feel like there's more skills to learn, or you don't know everything, or you feel intimidated, that's okay, because that's how we all feel when we first come onto the scene. And then we rethink that. We recognize our worth, our value. We turn to thinking about our strengths and away from hyper-focusing on our perceived weaknesses. We seek out community. We find mentors. We find people in our lives that also can acknowledge the duality of their narratives, those two sides of the story. And we can get to a better place together of recognizing all of our voices matter. We all belong, and we're all capable of making infinite contributions to our professional and personal world.
I think, obviously there's some sage wisdom there and some good things. You said something a little earlier that reminded me of a sports analogy, in the idea of people start getting tight as the pressure starts to mount. And one of the things that I take as a benefit now is that I went through my syndrome early and got it over with. It's kind of like when you're undefeated, you're about to go into the playoffs. You're like, man, they might want to lose one now, so that way they can kind of release the valve a little bit. Because as you continue to try to be undefeated towards the championship, it's more and more pressure. So as you said, as you get older in your career, or you get longer in your career, if you had that road paved for you, or you've had rose-colored glasses on this entire time, that's when the shock can be that much. It's like catching chicken pox when you're grown, right? It can have that much greater effect when you get into that C-suite role, and now the walls start closing in, and you need to have something to help you regulate at that point, because this is a real situation. But what she said was, you also have to encounter the fact that because of who you are racially, or from a gender perspective, it may have a different or more intense impact on you, because there's not as much of a village to bounce off of. You got to understand, as we went up higher and higher in the levels, we talked about being the only African-American in this situation, and you start feeling more and more on an island. The one thing that creates a sense of community is seeing yourself in others. And when you start saying, I didn't go to this school, I'm not part of this fraternity, I don't yacht, I don't, do some of the things that these folks that are, I learned how to golf late because everybody was always talking about golfing. And I was like, okay, I might as well go through this. Not because necessarily I had an interest, and I didn't want to assimilate. But at a point in time, this is going to come up. I'm going to get these invites, right, at some point in time, if I continue on the trajectory to which I thought I should be on. And these are the things that start to mess with you. These are the things that and then of course you have hazing and all these, things that they got to bring you in on and make sure that you can get drunk with the best of them and all this other kind of stuff. So a lot of that plays a part, but I do believe that having that outlet, having that accountability by that person, that mentoring, she talked about mentoring and networking, things of that nature, that helps a lot when it comes to perspective, taking a step back outside of your emotions and saying, this is what he said, this is what you heard, and this is the distinction between the two, or what she said and what you heard. And I needed that desperately at a point in my career.
Yeah, so let's just take what she said in terms of what you should do.
Mhm.
Okay. So number one, in what she said, we all don't, everybody doesn't know everything,
Mhm.
right? So that's everything. So when you feel that I don't know or anything like that, recognize you know what you know and you know what you don't know. Everybody's been in that situation. So this is not a situation that's just frowning on you. Okay. So that's number one. Number two, to that point, is yes, recognize you feel uncomfortable because you're doing something new.
Mhm.
Okay. And this ain't the first time that you felt uncomfortable when you do stuff new. Right. And you are able to get past that. You're able to champion that. So that's basically it's in your head, right? Second, yes, you're to your point. Yes, if you don't see people that look like you, but at the end of the day, you still need to find mentors, or to her point, you need to share how you really feel to others, right? Which is tough to do, right?
Mhm.
But by doing that, you will find out 9 times out of 10, you will find out that the people that you're sharing it with, they've been through that as well, right? That's just part of the humanity that we all go through. And years ago, it would be, people wouldn't be authentic and share, right? Now people are a lot more open to saying how they feel, right?
Mhm.
What they're going through, if they're dealing with mental issues, whatever the case may be. So, at the end of the day, this is something and again, this is something that happens to a lot of people. Doesn't matter your mental status in terms of how smart you are or what school you went to or education status, or it doesn't matter. When you're in a situation where you feel unfamiliar, you feel that you haven't done this before, and the world keeps moving, and you're like, oh, am I really in the right role? Is this really for me? Do I rate with these individuals? Recognize those individuals are no different than you. Those individuals dealt with a lot of the same angst and a lot of the same stuff that you feel as well. And they got past it. You can get past it. And by doing that, that should help you put yourself on the path of moving forward.
And I think it's a great construct, but the issue that you run into is when the stakes get high, Tony. Like when it's you on the team because they hired you, so you made it past the first gate. But the higher you go, the more you have to lose, and that's where the anxiety kicks in. Is that hold on? Now I'm the vice president of 300 people, and so 300 people's livelihood is dependent on decisions that I make, and then you start cascading. When it rains, it pours
No,
type
no,
of
no.
situation.
I get that, but
Mhm.
so what are you supposed to do? Just give up?
No,
No, right? So that's my point.
right.
My point is, it doesn't matter. So yeah, you may be feeling that angst. You may
Hmm.
feel like it's all on me, or
Hmm.
am I smart enough to make the decisions for this whole group? So I'm not disagreeing with you, but you
Hmm.
still got to do something to get out of it, right?
Right, right,
That's what we're talking about here, right?
right,
So it can happen being an entry level coming in,
right.
or to your point, it can happen when you move up and you got promoted. Now you're over this whole division.
Right.
Okay. And now you got people are asking you questions that you may not be familiar with. Right. And some people are saying, yeah, we hired Chris because we know he's going to be the man and he's going to take us here. And you may not feel that way. You
Hmm.
may be like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. Right.
Hmm.
So that's real, but you got to get out of it. Right. And
Hmm.
how to get out of it is recognize that this ain't just for you. You're not the only person that felt this way.
Hmm.
You're learning new things. You know what you know and you don't know, but you can learn those things, right?
Right.
You're not over your head. and then you share that, and then you network with other individuals. Because here's the thing, when you start networking, okay, then you find out that, guess what? I'm not the only actually, I'm not as dumb as I think I am. I'm not, and seriously, right? It
Right.
reminds me when I was a kid,
Mhm.
and we're talking, I grew up in the 70s where, there was corporal punishment, right? Your parents, they beat your butt, right? But in my mind, I thought we were the only ones getting a whooping and stuff to that nature. Till one day I heard my friend, we had the window open. I heard my friend saying, "No, mama, no, mama, no, I'm sorry, mama." You know what I did? I started smiling
Right.
because I was like, it ain't just me.
Right.
All right. So,
Right.
that's real. And that's what people need to recognize. It's not just them.
Understood.
Make sense?
Understood. Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
but see, here's the thing though. That's one level, because in corporate America, as we navigate, there's a lot of things you got to deal with, right? And
Right.
now, so you got to get out of your head in terms of, do I rate? Am I good enough? That's one level. But now you got to be able to navigate the hierarchies, in corporate America, right? Like I said, when I was in the military, it was simple, right? It was a straight linear, and anybody can tell you what to do. All right. They didn't have to be a sergeant. They didn't have to be a sergeant first class or a captain or a lieutenant captain or a major or anything like that. Anybody, if you started the military one day before I did, you could tell me you actually outranked me. All right. You can tell me what to do. So it was clear in terms of who was in charge, who at any time anybody could be in charge based on who's around them, stuff to that nature. Corporate America is totally different.
One of the things that makes it extremely different is the idea of ranking from a military perspective is genuinely earned. Now, we talked about officers coming in with degrees and things of that nature, but the reality of it is, if you're a lieutenant and you want to be a step higher, you have to have been something before you become this, right? That's real simple. You can't be a general if you hadn't been a colonel, or if you hadn't been that's real simple from a military perspective. Please do not believe that the person that's the CFO was ever a director or was ever an executive director or whatever the cascading, hierarchy is at the company. You got people that come off the street and they tell you what the hell? I've been here 18 years. This young whippersnapper wet behind ears come off the street and got a title and think that he can tell me how things go. So those are some of the things that are tough when you talk about the hierarchy of corporate America, for sure, is that not all people that are making the calls and making the determinations have seen the battlefield. They've seen what really goes on here. Some people come in with the big belt buckle, new sheriff in town, I'm going to turn this thing around. They have no idea what the hell they're talking about, but they came in with all these ideas. So the things that you've developed over your career and the things you put in place may be disrupted by a leadership change or whatever the case may be. And those waters are extremely difficult to navigate.
Right, right. Well, let me ask you this. So, give me an example in terms of what you just got finished saying that you dealt with when, anybody, it doesn't matter that they didn't go linearly up.
Right.
They went
Right.
from, an account executive. I'm talking from a sales standpoint, and they
Yeah,
went to
yeah.
a senior account executive. Then
Yeah.
they became a director, and then
Yeah.
a senior director, and then they became a VP, and then SVP. So, tell the audience a little. Give them an example of what you're talking about.
I'll give you a great example, Tony. So we sitting at a big company, right? We're sitting at a big company and we peers with a guy. And this guy's not married. He's young, white male, smart, but he's just like us as far as we're concerned. He has a sponsor. So he got somebody high up that he cool with. Don't know how they got cool. That's none of my business. But anyway, the guy recommends him for a project. The project takes him to Chicago for 6 months. He's like, yeah, I'm gonna go to Chicago for 6 months. They got me a corporate housing, woo this, that. He come back from Chicago a level ahead of us. We like, what? How you do that there, right? Like, okay, cool. Ultimately, we didn't realize he had been fast tracked or tapped, or we call it high potential, listed or whatever the case may be. Within the next 18 months, he went up 2 more times. And we like, hold on, what's the elixir? What's going on? Now, some of it was his availability, his ability to go and do and be what they needed him to be and show that he was down for the cause by uprooting his life and changing. He had that latitude that we didn't have. That was fine. From an education perspective, we were all on the same wavelength. But then he started getting internal education. See, it's different when you have the degree, this person has a degree, you have an MBA, right? But then you start rubbing shoulders in this division. And now you have that applicable knowledge. And then you get exposed to this thing. And they groom subjectively whom they like to be able to stack the deck or create the job description. As you know, as I know, a lot of time when a requisition is filled for a job and you see it on the company website, they already know who's going to get that job. That's already been established. They done had the conversation. We got to do this for legal reasons. We got to do this for protocol. We're going to have to do some minority interviews, according to, we got to interview a woman. We got to check these boxes off. And what I tell people, honestly, and this is where it is serious, I tell people that I mentor, never believe that you're interviewing for that role. Believe that you're creating an impression on the person. So when the next job comes available, you're the one that they slide in there mentally.
Right.
And then, they got to figure it out for whomever. So don't go in with a defeatist attitude. Go in with, I'm going to put something on their mind to where the next time something comes up, we already had Tony established for that role that we, opened up and Chris happened to put in for. But now that I know what Chris is on, I think that he's the great next one or the great next candidate in that type of situation. But it's all those tactics that if you don't have someone to calm you down or to tell you the game behind the scenes, behind the music, right? If you don't have somebody that's giving you that information, you start doing too much counting. You start saying, wait a second, I'm better than Brian.
No question, buddy. And then you become disgruntled. And you don't have the productivity that you typically bring because you're saying, how did Susan get here? Or how did Joe get here? And I've been here longer than them. And so there is a game that has to be played. And a lot of people don't want to play the game. Okay. I've chatted with people who, they complain, I'm still at this level. And I've seen this person grow and I've seen this person grow and I run circles around them, blah, blah, blah. So then I say, and then they're like, I said, so let me ask you a question. Are you building a network? Are you, chatting with people throughout the organization, right? Are you going over and say, hey, I'm willing to do this, or how can I help you over here? I want to know more about what this department, I don't want to do that.
Right.
Are you going out to lunch with your superiors, right? Are you going to dinner? Are you going to their barbecue? I don't want, when I get home, when I leave there, I don't want to spend no time with nobody, right? I just want to come in, but I still should be recognized. And I'm like, it ain't gonna happen. All right. Absolutely. Because that's part of it. That is part of it. And in anything, it's part of, you have to build a community around you. Okay. You just got finished saying it. You may be interviewing for this one role, right? And yes, you want to get that role, but it's really about letting them know who you are and that you can, if you don't get this role, they keep you in mind for other roles. I remember this was a long time ago. I remember my boss, he was like, Tony, I want to make you the assistant manager. This was years ago. I'm talking, this was like mid 90s or something, right? They didn't have a position open, right? But he talked to the VP and then she was coming into town. So he was like, look, I want you to go meet her at her hotel room, right? And so we set up a meeting, right? And I met with her and we chatted for about a half hour, 45 minutes, And she said, look, Tony, I don't know you. Your boss is saying high things about you. So I really want to get to know you, blah, 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 blah. Right. So I met with her, talked about it and this and that. And she said, well, great. There's not a position right now, but I need to know what my bench looks like. Okay. And that was real. Okay. It's that, hey, we don't have something right now, but this person, right? Something opens up. I know I have somebody that fits the bill. Okay. I didn't walk out the lobby kicking a rock talking about, man, I came here and just waste my time. Right. All right. So recognize that part of growing in corporate America is networking.
Right.
is spending time with people, is building relationships, is going to play golf, is going to lunch, is and more importantly, it's also you going out of your division or your group, right? And meeting other people in other departments,
Right.
okay? And getting to know what they do and getting
Right.
to know what and being inquisitive and saying, how does that work? And blah, 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 blah. Hey, I would love to have a cup of coffee with those things. That's how you expand your brand. Because here's the kicker. Let's go back to how you kicked this off with the story. That dude, okay, that you said I'm going to Chicago for 6 months or whatever the case may be, right? Okay. He was hanging with somebody.
Yes, Lord.
Okay. He was hanging with somebody that liked him, right? And said, I see something in you. And they had the pull to move him and fast track him, okay, past everybody else. Now, from a bird's eye view, it's easy to say, he must be a son-in-law. All right. But you don't know. Nobody knows what somebody else dealt with or what they went through. You don't know. But this is the one thing I do know. It's about relationships. Okay. And as a salesperson, the one thing I've learned and one thing I've always used to teach my teams, you have to sell internally just as much as you sell externally. Right. So in other words, it's not just about selling to our clients and making them partners. Right. It's about selling internally to your colleagues and other leaders within the organization and eventually making them partners, right? And how do I know when you're doing that? You know how I know? Because when I'm out and I'm having lunch with another leader of another department, it was like, hey, Chris is on your team? I'm like, yeah, I love him. He's awesome. All right. So other people are telling me about you. All right. That's how I know you're out shaking hands and kissing babies. Right. All right. And building your brand. So that is that's one of the most important things that you can do.
I think also, and this happened in my career, you have to be cognizant of detractors and people who can't assist you, who have no desire. I had a situation, Tony, where my vice president retired. And so I'm doing like a chief of staff type role. My vice president retires and I'm like, okay, so I end up getting pulled under another division. Well, when I get put under that vision, you're supposed to make your intentions known. Let them know this is what I aspire to. This is what I'm developing within myself. These are things that I'm looking at from a career perspective. So we finally have this conversation, me and my new boss, and we have this conversation. And at the end of the conversation, I felt like I was extremely articulate, that it was pretty much a slam dunk. All she had to say was, yeah, just keep doing what you're supposed to do. And we could talk about that at review time. But that's not what she said. She said, well, let's look at, and she started naming stuff that I'd already done. So then I realized she doesn't even know my resume. She doesn't know my background. And so sometimes you have to manage up, right? But because she had already said it, she was going to stick by it no matter what. Like, man, no, you got to this and that. And I said, okay. So I evaluated and started to Shawshank my way out of that role to get into another division. You know, so you ever see Shawshank Redemption where he get the spoon and dig himself out the prison? I didn't throw a tantrum. I grabbed the spoon, Tony. I grabbed the proverbial spoon and started, and we had that conversation in February. By October, I was in a different position. And I remember her when I announced it to her, hey, I'm going to go to this other team. I think this is better for my impression of my career. And she acted stunned. Okay, you sure you think this is really going to be good for you? And yeah, I think it's going to be great. I've had some good conversations. This is a business unit I've supported, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, I get over there 6 months later, I'm promoted to be her peer. She stopped answering emails and all that stuff. 1 year later, she's demoted, right? So the moral of the story is you also have to recognize, as much as you find people that you can align with and get mentoring and those type of things, you also have to look for landmines in people. And you have to, don't let them distract you or try to necessarily subscribe to it, but you figure out a way to comfortably avoid those traps and continue on your path forward. But it's very tough when you have leadership that is in that that roadblock, that represents that roadblock. Have you had a situation where you had a leader and you realize, wait a second, my record shows that I'm the best here, always been the best here. For whatever reason, this new guy, leadership changes, organizational structures, restructures, company gets bought, whatever. They bring somebody in, they don't know you. You give them the best Tony you've ever been, and they like, I've seen that before. I had another Tony at my old job. How do you then make that adjustment and make that pivot to make sure that you're not holding yourself back from a career perspective?
Yeah, buddy. I think you kind of said it a little bit, right? So I've been in that situation, and what I had to learn. So going in, I always thought that my boss had my best interest.
Right.
That's not true.
Absolutely.
Sometimes,
Right.
but not 100% of the time. They
Right.
don't. All right. Sometimes people just have a job,
Right.
okay, and they're trying to hold on, right? And and you can know that by how you just did it, how she said, "Oh, you got to do this, or you got to do this," and you're like, "Wait a minute, you don't even know. I've already did that, right?" So they're giving you lip service and the whole nine yards,
Exactly.
right? Now, one of the two things you could do is you could sit there and pout, right, and like I ain't gonna never get ahead, or you can quit, right? What I did is exactly what I talked about earlier. I went around them. All right. I built relationships with their boss. All right. I built the relationship sideways, left and right. There's nothing that says is you gotta stay within this person, stay within under this person. Right. So that's why it's important. Because at the end of the day, yes, it's great if you have a leader that's going to help sponsor you or help promote your brand. But at the end of the day, you got to promote your brand.
Right.
Okay. And not promote your brand like, look at me, I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. Build relationships. You got to bring the work. Let's be clear here, right? You got to do really good work, but also you got to expand out and meet and deal with other people in other departments. That's how you elevate your brand. And then 9 times out of 10, you can't be held back. Okay. Because it's now not up to your boss.
Right.
Okay. Because now other people on high, let's just go back to the story you just started with. All right. I don't think that person that went to Chicago, that was based on his boss.
Right. Absolutely.
All right. That was people on high
Right.
that he built a relationship. The boss probably would have never gotten him to that position or that opportunity. So that's not, now sometimes I've had people that advocated for me. I just told you the story about, my guy who said, I want to make you this and that. So absolutely, right. I've had people, but I've been in situations where no, they haven't. And you know what? I still was friendly with them. All right. I didn't like, you ain't no good for me. I just understood the situation, right? This is part of learning and part of navigating. I understood who I was dealing with. Okay. That this person, great friend, we can go out and have a drink or two, but this person ain't going to get me promoted. Okay. Matter of fact, they're going to give me excuses why I can't. Right? So at the end of the day, I'm not listening to that. Right? I'm going to go and make it myself or do the best that I can by building relationships around that individual. Right? And I know this could be controversial because some people, I've chatted with some people about this, and they're like, oh, if I go and chat with his boss or her boss, they gonna get mad at me. All right. And I get that, right? At the end of the day, either you can sit there twiddling your thumbs, right? Or you can make something happen, right? And there's a million ways how you can still build relationships, okay? And still keep your boss in the loop, right? And it doesn't seem like you're going around him or her. But at the end of the day, it's important. And here's the other thing. This is probably the most important. Any leader that's willing to squash somebody from having relationships outside of their group ain't a great leader. Okay. I want my team building relationships with everybody, all the leadership. Okay. I want them. I don't need them to stay under my thumb. Okay. I'm confident enough that what I bring to the table and that's called empowerment. Okay. So I want them to build relationships with everybody. All right. Because guess what? It's great for them. My role is to help them become successful first. Because when they become successful, then I become successful, right? So the last thing you want to do is hold people back, okay? So, but I get it that some people would be nervous about that, but there's still ways that you can still do that and still stay, kind of in line with your superior.
How did you recognize that coming from the military? Because that's not what you do in the military. You do not go over your commanding officer and tell nothing. And so from a militaristic perspective, is that true, or is that the old military, or is that
I did.
Oh, Tony.
Buddy,
Oh.
I had relationships with the LT. All right.
Oh, wow.
I mean, buddy, it's
You would
about
advise that? You would advise that, Tony?
I didn't go to the LT saying he did this. I had relationships with the
Yeah.
LT. All
Okay,
right. Me and
okay.
the So what I mean, does me and the LT hang out? No. Right.
Right.
But I was friendly with the LT. I used to
Gotcha.
chat with, hey, man, Lieutenant Ferry, what, blah. And we had a relationship. Okay. And to be fair, he saved me a few times from my direct boss, right?
Okay.
So I mean, buddy, but that's part. So that's something I learned. That's why these things that I'm talking about, I didn't just start doing. I was
Right.
doing this in the military. I had a relationship with the LT, the captain, the other NCOs on the other units, right? They would speak on my back. I remember one. One unit, the captain said something negative about, or he thought something negative about me, right? And one of the other staff sergeants from another platoon said, "No, sir, Franklin ain't that." Spoke up on my behalf because I built relationships with those individuals. You see my point? Now, had my direct boss been there, he'd be like, "Yeah, he ain't no good." See what I'm saying? But that's the key. The key, buddy, I'm telling you, okay? And one of the fears is some people, well, Tony, you're outgoing and this and that. And that's what people think. I don't want to get into it, but you can still do this and be somebody that's not gregarious, okay? It can still be done, okay? But at the end of the day, you want to build relationships with as many people as possible. Again, you got to bring the work. I've always had a great attitude in everything that I did. All right, good, bad, whatever. I always had a positive. So those things, people want to be around people like that. Okay, regardless of their title. Okay, regardless if I'm walking the halls and things are going wrong, and then I see somebody on the scene. Well, hey, what's going on? Hey, Tony, how's it going? Oh, you know what we make? I'm turning 50 cents into a buck. Oh, Tony, I love that. Little stuff like that. That's how you build these relationships. Okay, you got to be who you are authentically, but don't stay under somebody's thumb. Okay. Spread, be a butterfly. Butterflies, what they do, they go over here and touch this, and then they go over here and touch that, and then they go over here. Be a butterfly. And I've always been exactly, and I've always been that throughout my career from the military on.
Okay, understood. And I think from a workplace dynamic perspective, you do have to see how things go around here and what is the tone, because not every personality fits every team culture or company culture. Have you ever been in a situation where you said, you know what, this sounded like a good thing, but now that I'm here, I'm too much for these bums? Or oh wow,
absolutely.
Damn.
I mean, that's part of it too, is recognizing when to jump off. I always said if I was on the Titanic, soon as it starts snowing, I'm jumping off. Soon as it's cold enough to make ice, I'm leaving, right? So that's one of the other things, is recognizing, and you're only going to learn that through experience, right? Sometimes we talked about in our last episode, sometimes people start a new job and then they expect to get promoted in 6 months and they don't get a promotion, they want to quit. All right. Which makes no sense. Okay. You have to give everything a chance. You got to be willing to give that effort, right? And be the best and learn and build your network while you're there, right? But at some point, you have to recognize that as you continue to move up in, you can continue to navigate throughout your career. Some places ain't a fit. You thought it was a fit. They thought it was a fit. It ain't a fit. All right. And so you got to understand that. And this is old saying, if you're going to fail fast. Right. So you have to learn that sometimes, and then people get caught up, if I leave here, my resume going to look bad, blah, blah, blah. And I get that. I get all those things. But some places are not going to be a fit. If it's not fertile ground where you can grow, where you can plant in soil, where you can be able to grow. Right. I'm not saying everything's easy for you, but you can grow and you have a support system. It can even be tough love, but they're looking to help you become the best. I've been in places where there was tough love, right? Where I didn't like him, right? But they were pushing me. And because I had this work ethic, when people pushed me, all right, I'm going to do it. And I did it just to prove them wrong. And they were right, right? And I was learning, right? So you have to understand, look at your environment. Is it an environment for you to grow? Is it an environment for you to learn? Is it an environment where your boss or superiors, they may push you, but they're trying to get the best out of you so you can become successful? Then that's a spot you probably end up staying. But if it's not that, where it's negative, right? Nothing you do is right. The culture in the organization is horrible. Okay. You can't go chat. People want to keep you under their thumb. You can't, it's a micromanagement situation, right? Where they got to know everything you do, blah, 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 blah. You can't be that butterfly. They don't empower you. You're afraid to make a mistake, all those things. Then that probably ain't the spot for you to go. And sometimes that's okay, right? Because we talked about it. Success is not linear. Sometimes it's this. And going back, sometimes you take a step back, like, you know what, I made a mistake there. But here's the thing, and this is my thing. And my daughter printed this thing out on the back of my phone, and it's my motto. Okay. And my motto is I never lose. Either I win or I learn. Okay. And so learning is if you went to a spot and you didn't really get it wasn't a good spot, but you learned a lot of things there, it was a great spot. Okay. So you didn't lose, you didn't back up, you learned. So now you're more equipped for the next spot. And here's the last thing I'm going to say with that. Every place I've ever been at, and this is just me reflecting on my experiences. Every place, good, bad, indifferent, I had to be at that place and learn a bunch of stuff to get to the next place. No matter how great it was, no matter how bad it was. If I had not went to this terrible organization, I wouldn't have learned how to, vet organizations, right? And how to make sure before I do anything, I'm going to make sure this is a good place for me. Okay. I didn't know how to do that before, right? So you have to look at it as a learning lesson. And if you learn from those situations, you just grow. You grew. And that's something that nobody can take away from you.
I think you said something very valuable in the qualification of taking a lateral, right? It can't just, I think when you're young, you think, okay, I'm this, now I need to be 2, a level 4, level 5. You start doing numerical counting and you want to go up in that regard. And you feel like, okay, I've done this for a couple of years. Now I need to go to the next number. And sometimes that shift to the right or to the left adds so much more value to make your resume more robust. Your experience is so much more robust. I had a mentor, a gentleman named Hartman Williams, that told me years ago, and I didn't believe him when he said it, but I respect him enough to absorb it. And he said, let me tell you something. You're going to get a lot further in your career at the things you say no to, as opposed to the things you say yes to. And I didn't understand it because it's like, if they offer this and they paying this, I'm there. I'm up. I'm getting it. And I had to be so much more judicial as I got older, more seasoned, more wise in my career to be. And I've been presented with opportunities and offers, and you and I talked about it today, in fact. But I'm like, I'm straight on that. I realize what I'm trying to accomplish here, and that's not necessarily aligned with that, but you got to be willing to stand on it and not cry about it later. I can't have a situation where I turn down a job and then my man take it, he go to Chicago, and 2 years later, he's my boss's boss. And I'm like, no, I got to let that burn because I knew what was good for me at that time. And what's for you is for you. If you're a spiritual person, what's for you is for you. So you just have to kind of come to terms with you understanding yourself, doing the best that you can, applying the most that you can to a situation, and then letting it play. It's like, Philadelphia with trust the process, right? Joe Embiid is the process. And you have to understand the process. And I've had conversations with VPs and SVPs and said, hey, should I be trusting the process here? Because it seems like I'm not understanding the vision or the whatever. And they've laughed at it. You know what I mean? Because sometimes I have trusted the process and it worked out. And in my younger years and even in between times, I've quasi trusted the process and realized they making it up as they go along. So I think that there's value in all of that when you're recognizing the way that the place is established, the dynamics that exist there, and how solidified the company is in some of the direction that it's going for you to align yourself with.
And that's going to be, look, that only comes with experience, right?
Mhm.
We've all made mistakes and gone to places and found out later that, when they pull the curtain back, you was like, what? All right.
The beer
So
goggles, huh? You
yeah,
go
I
have
mean,
beer
that
professional beer
happens.
goggles.
That happens, right? So you only can control what you can control, right?
Mhm.
And that's based on your, we talked about it in our last episode, your effort and your
Mhm.
attitude, right?
Mhm.
And then you be observant and learn, build a network, listen to people, know what information you should keep, know what
Mhm.
other information you should let go, right? Because not everything somebody tells you is going to be, even though they said, I'm going to give you some good advice, right?
Right.
And it may not be good advice, right? It may be there, because to your point, sometimes even people that you say, oh, this is my mentor, this, that, they don't have your best interest. They might want to try to
Mhm.
keep you where you are
Mhm.
because they can see that you're very talented and you're going to be moving on and they're going to stay stagnant. So
Mhm.
there's a lot that you have to learn,
Mhm.
okay? But the thing is, you can learn it as long as one of my favorite sayings, the mind is like an umbrella. It only works when it's open.
Mhm.
Okay. And there's going to be times when you feel down. I mean, buddy, you talked about lateral moves. I mean, look,
Mhm.
there's been times when I felt like, oh man, I'm not progressing. I'm not going here. I took this place and it's horrible. And, oh, I should have stayed where I was at. That's real. I think the
Mhm.
majority of people go through that, right?
Mhm.
And then because you're looking at it as at the moment,
Mhm.
right? When I look back, I'm like, oh, that was the best thing that ever happened because it
Mhm.
opened up this, and this, right?
Mhm.
But you don't
Mhm.
see that then, right? You just don't see it, right? So you have to recognize, I don't care who I and this is just, I believe the majority of people have experienced the stuff that we're talking about.
Mhm.
Okay. Even the people that you put on a pedestal,
Mhm.
you think they're the greatest, or they
Mhm.
picked every right move for their career. I remember a friend of mine asked me, he said, Tony, man, you went here, you did this, and that. What was your strategy? How did you figure it out? I was like, bruh, I ain't had no strategy.
I was
It's
just
like,
gunning.
it just kind of worked out.
Right, right, right,
All
right,
right. It
right,
just
right.
kind of boom, boom, boom. Right. But you always got to keep learning. And I'll end it on this story real quick. When I was,
I got a question for you, Tony,
oh, go
before you
ahead,
get to
buddy.
that story. How did you know when to activate your allies? Because you, like me, grew up in a situation where when we go in here, don't ask for nothing, don't expect nothing, don't. And so, from a cultural perspective, it's sometimes hard for us to get over ourselves and ask for grace or ask for opportunity. We feel like, hey, you know me. If you seen that, you should have came to me and blah, blah, blah. So how did you get to a point where you have these allies, you built this network, you got this good equity that you've established? How did you get to the point where, you know what, I'm gonna go and just, unapologetically say, hey, I need you to activate here or put me on here or whatever the case may be? Because I think a lot of us don't want to ask nobody for nothing. We want to be self-made, self-taught, self-employed, all of this other stuff. But you need a coalition of individuals that you can lean on. How did you get to that point?
Buddy, it was the biggest chip that it took me a long time to get over it.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. Because
yeah.
that's where you could talk about pride.
Mm-hmm,
Right. And for me to go ask somebody and say, hey, can you put a word in, or can
mm-hmm.
you connect me to this? I don't have no problem doing it now. Okay. But, but, but for a long time, I was
Mhm,
afraid to do that because I
mhm,
looked at it as being a negative on me.
mhm.
Right. I looked at it as if I'm asking them for help, they must think I'm weak.
Yeah,
Okay. Or,
yeah,
and I really thought that. Right. So I
yeah,
was afraid to do that. Now,
yeah,
people would offer, or they would say,
yeah,
hey, I'm going to connect you and this and that. But for a while, I didn't ask a lot. All right.
right.
Um, People did it because of our relationship and stuff to that nature. It took me a while to get to that point where I could say, hey, man, hey, Chris, bro, can we get together? I want to pick your brain on something. Okay. And felt comfortable and didn't look at it as a negative.
Mhm,
Okay. So that was a big hurdle that I had to get over. And I'm going to be honest with you. Like I said, now I'm okay with it.
mhm,
But, that was a huge thing, huge thing. And so I get it. And these are the things, you know, um, These are the things that people don't recognize when they see people in their organization and they may be on a senior level. They think they got it all squared away and they had it all figured out. We don't. We don't, right? I remember somebody, one of my, somebody on my team said this. A few people said it at different organizations. They were like, Tony, one of your great things is you're so patient. And I'm looking at them. I'm like, no, I ain't. All right. I said, you got to recognize, all right, what I'm saying in my head. All right. It wouldn't be patience, right? But I know that doesn't work. It's not going to get the results that I'm looking for. I have to. So, I learned this a long time ago. God will sometimes takes your strongest weakness and make it a strength.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I've always been an impatient individual, but when you start managing people, okay, you can't be impatient, right? You have to be patient because you got to give them chance to grow. You have to empower them. You have to, so it takes patience. So think about that for a second. It doesn't make sense for a person that doesn't have any patience leading a team of people where you need to have patience. Right? For it to work, for them to be successful, for everything to work. So those are the things that as individuals that we have to work on that we don't really talk about that much, right? So every human being is imperfect. Every VP or senior vice president, CEO, or they're insecure about something. All right. They have some type of issue in their own head that they deal with. Right. They've been able to overcome it to certain levels to rise up. But that doesn't mean they're cured. That doesn't mean they're infallible. Every human being. I'll tell you this last story. I remember, I'm not going to say who it was, but I remember one day I was working at this company and our CMO, she called me in the office and she said, Tony, can I talk to you for a second? I was like, yeah. She said, right now, am I doing a good job? Am I, and I'm looking at her. I'm like, why are you saying that? I just feel like everybody's looking at me. She was going through something, right? Based on her title, it's like, oh, she should be great. No, she was a human being. She was going through some stuff. And she felt comfortable enough to call me in her office and ask me when she was going through this episode. And I was like, look, this is in your head. You're doing fine, blah, 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 blah. Right? For number one, for her to do that, okay, she had to be authentic. That you think and this was a very strong lady. So trust me, this ain't somebody this is very strong, right? And anybody else would think that she would never do that, that she had it all together. All right. And 9 times out of 10, she probably did. But at this moment, she was feeling the pressure. She was feeling whatever. And that is real. And we're human. So we have to recognize that everybody puts their pants on and dress on the same way. And we're all human. And the only reason that they have the title or they're the leader, because they've been doing it longer than you.
Right. Makes sense. I mean, that's sage wisdom. And hopefully that's something that resonates with our audience. And it definitely has resonated with me. You never get too old to keep learning, picking up nuggets, right? And so it's a couple of nuggets. And so now that I'm reflecting on some things, I'm like, man, I wish I had been wise enough or seen enough to know it at that point in time. But, it's never too late to do the right thing. So hopefully this adds that, that arrow into the quiver that people have as they escalate up their career.
Yeah. I mean, look, buddy, it's all about learning. I mean, at the end of the day, like I said, that mind is like an umbrella. It only works when you're open. So if your mind is open all the time, you can learn from anybody. We all learn. I've learned and I continue to learn. That's one of the reasons why I wake up every day, spend time with my family, help them, but also keep learning from people like yourself, right? And other individuals, right? Because nobody knows it all, right? And sometimes we think we know something and we don't, okay? And the only way that you're able to correct that is by being open to be willing to say, I don't know. Somebody taught me this a long time ago. When you say you know, you don't. When you say I don't know, now you can learn. All right. Think about that for a second, right? And that's real. That's real. And so I just think every human being has the opportunity to be the best that they can be, right? And the toughest critic is who? Ourselves,
That's right.
right? We're the toughest critic on ourselves because we're in our head and we think everybody else got it together and we don't. And that's not true. It's not true, right? So once you can get past that, then you can learn, then you can grow, right? So final thoughts, my brother.
It reminds me, we talked about the syndrome. We talked about kind of understanding what's going on in your environment. We talked about the courage to leave an environment that's not conducive for your growth. And we talked about you putting your own mask on first. And some of the things that you said reminded me of a quote, and I hope not to butcher this quote, but people in the chat or wherever, can fix it for me on the back end. But it said, in my youth, I always pretended to be the man that I wanted to be. And then ultimately either I became him or he became me.
Yeah, I love it.
So you get, but it's the effort, it's the stick to itiveness, it's the consistency. Like you said, what are you gonna do? You're kind of harsh with it, Tony, but what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Like that.
What, you gonna give up?
That's that military. But it's some truth in that, right? It's some truth in that tough love. It's some truth in that candid wisdom. And I think that you have to make determinations as to, are you really going to stick by this? Or are you going to move on and do something different? But sitting around and whining and pouting and pointing fingers and all of that, that's not constructive. That is, absolutely antithetical to you being the best you that you have at your disposal.
Well, thank you, my brother. Appreciate the final thoughts. And hey, great conversation today. So I think it's now time for
Tony's Tidbit.
And the tidbit today, actually, there's going to be 2 tidbits. So you're getting 2 for 1 because Chris just gave you one, right? So I'm going to give you another one, right? So the tidbit today is by Donnie Osmond. And the tidbit is, and Donnie says, if you're climbing the ladder of life, you go rung by rung, one step at a time. Don't look too far up. Set your goals high, but take one step at a time. Sometimes you don't think you're progressing until you step back and see how high you've really gone. And that's by Donnie Osmond. And we kind of spoke to that today.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I think that, once again, great conversation. Make sure that you folks tune in for the next episode. We'll keep bringing, the noise to you and making sure that we meet you where you are. But we also want to remind you to tune in to this week's episode of Need to Know with Nsinga. Don't miss Need to Know by Dr. Nsinga Burton from a Black Executive Perspective podcast, where Dr. Burton dives into timely and crucial topics that shape our community and our world. You'll gain tremendous insight and perspective from her wealth of knowledge. This is something that you absolutely do not want to miss.
Absolutely. So we hope you enjoyed today's episode, climbing the corporate ladder and overcoming barriers and embracing empowerment.
And then, of course, we have to always remind you to incorporate our call to action, which is LESS. And that first L, stands for learn. Educate yourself on racial and cultural nuances at all times, wherever you can.
Exactly. And then after you learn, we have the letter E. E stands for empathy. You should be more empathetic to your fellow man based on the stuff that you've learned.
And then the first S is share. Share your insights with others, loved ones, people who just happen to have a conversation with you. The key to growth is don't hide it, divide it. Make sure that you share.
Absolutely. And then finally, the final S is stop. We want to stop discrimination as it walks in our path. So if grandpa says something at the Thanksgiving table, you say, Grandpa, we don't say that. We don't believe that. So you stop it right there. By everyone incorporating less, LESS, we're going to make a more fair, more understanding world. And more importantly, we're going to be able to see the change that we want to see because less will become more.
So we want to encourage you to encourage us. Help us become strong through your wisdom and insight. So go to our website, sign up to the newsletter, let us know, review, subscribe, whatever you can do, provide comments, help us reach you where you are so we can keep bringing good information like this as much as possible.
Absolutely. And you can follow a Black Executive Perspective podcast on all of our socials, X, YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn, and Instagram at a Black Exec. For the co-hosts with the most, my man, Chris P. Reed. For the lady behind the glass is pulling all the levers, Noelle Miller. I'm Tony Tidbit. Guess what? We talked about it. We had some fun about it today. We love you. And guess what? We're out.
A Black Executive Perspective.